Chapter 5. A lesson. Este took her class of bells out of the songhouse. They rode in a flesket so that all of them could see outside. It was always a wonder to them, leaving the cold stone walls of the songhouse. Groans were never taken out. Breezes often were, and Bells knew that the trips in the flesket were only a taste of things to come. They went through deep forests, skimming over the underbrush as they followed a narrow road cut between tall trees. Birds paced them, and animals looked up amusedly as they passed. The children schooled to singing, however, the miracle came when they left the flesket. Este had the driver, who was only 18 and therefore just returned from being a singer outside, stopped them by a small waterfall. Este led the children to the side of the stream. She commanded silence, and because bells have the rudiments of control, they were able to hold utterly still and listen. They heard birdsong, which they longed to answer, the gurgle of the stream as it slopped against the rocks and inlets of the shore, the whisper of breezes through leaves and grass. They sat for 15 minutes, which was near the limit of their control, and then Este led them closer to the waterfall. It wasn't a long walk, but it was slick and damp as they approached the mist rising from the foot of the falls. There had been a landslide many years before, and instead of falling into the pool it had carved out of rock, the cascade tumbled onto rock and sprayed out in all directions. The children sat only a dozen meters away, and the water soaked them. Again, silence. Again, control. But this time they heard nothing but the crash of the water on the rock. They could see birds flying, could see leaves moving in the wind, but could hear nothing of that. After only a few minutes, Este released them. "What do we do?" asked one of the children. "What you want," answered Este. So they gingerly waited at the edge of the pool, while the driver watched to make sure no one drowned. Few of them noticed when Este left. Only Ansett followed her. She led him, though she gave no sign that she knew he was following, to a path leading up the steep slope to the top of the falls. Ansett watched her carefully to see where she was going. She climbed. He climbed after. It was not easy for him. His arms and legs were still clumsy with childhood, and he grew tired. There were hard places, where Este had only to step up, while Ansett had to clamber over rises half as high as he was. But he had not let Este out of his sight, and she, for her part, did not go too quickly for him. She had gathered her ground for the climb, and Ansett looked curiously at her legs. They were white and spindly, and her ankles looked too thin to hold her up. Yet she was nimble enough as they climbed. Ansett had never thought of her as having legs before. Children had legs, but masters and teachers rushed along with gowns brushing the floor. The sight of legs, just like a child's, made Ansett wonder if Este was like the girls in the shower and toilet. He imagined her squatting over the trench. It was a sight that he knew was forbidden, yet in his mind he violated even good manners and stared, and came face to face with Este at the top of the hill. He was startled, and showed it. She only murmured a few notes of reassurance. "You are meant to be here," her song said. Then she looked out beyond the hill, and Ansett looked after her. Behind them was forest in rolling hills, but here a lake spread out to lap the edges of a bowl of hills. Trees grew right to the edge, except for a few clearings. The lake was not large, as lakes go, but to Ansett it was all the water in the world. Only a few hundred meters away the lake poured over a lip of rock to make the waterfall. But here there was no hint of the violence of the fall. Here the lake was placid, and water birds skimmed and dipped and swam and dived, crying out from time to time. Este questioned him with a melody, and Ansett answered, "It's large, large as the sky." "That is not all you should see, Ansett, my son," she said to him. "You should see the mountains around the lake, holding it in." "What makes a lake?" "A river comes into this valley, pouring in the water. It has no place to go, so it fills up, until some spills out at the waterfall. It can fill no deeper than the lowest point. Ansett, this is control." "This is control." Ansett's young mind struggled to make the connection. "How is it control, Ansett?" "Because it is deep," Ansett answered. "You are guessing, not thinking." "Because," said Ansett, "it is all held in everywhere except one place, so that it only comes out a little at a time." "Closer," said Este, which meant he was wrong. Ansett looked at the lake, trying for inspiration, but all he could see was a lake. "Stop looking at the lake, Ansett, if the lake tells you nothing." So Ansett looked at the trees, at the birds, at the hills. He looked all around the hills, and he knew what Este wanted him to know. The water pours out of the low place, and not enough yet? If the low place were higher, the lake would be deeper, and if the low place were lower, there wouldn't be a lake. And Este broke off the conversation, or rather, changed languages, because now she sang, and the song exulted a little. It was low, and it was not loud, but it spoke, without words, of joy, of having found after long searching, of having given a gift carried far too long, of having at last eaten when she thought never to eat again. "I hungered for you, and you are here," said her song. And Anset understood all the notes of her song and all that lay behind the notes, and he, too, sang. Harmony was not taught to bells, but Anset sang harmony. It was wrong, it was only counter-melody. It was dissonant to Este's song, but it was nevertheless an augmentation of her joy. And where a mere teacher, with less control, might have been overcome by Anset's echo of the deepest parts of her song, Este had control enough to channel the ecstasy through her song. It became so powerful, and Anset was so receptive to it, that it overcame him, and he sobbed and clung to her, and still tried to sing through his tears. She knelt beside him, and held him, and whispered to him, and soon he slept. She talked to him in his sleep, told him things far beyond his comprehension, but she was laying pathways through his mind. She was building secret places in his mind, and in one of them she sang the love song, sang it so that at a time of great need it would sing back to him, and he would remember, and be filled. When he awoke, he remembered nothing of having lost control, nor did he remember Este speaking to him, but he reached out and took her hand, and she led him down the hill. It felt right to him to hold her hand, though such familiarity was forbidden between children and teachers, partly because his body had vague memories of holding the hand of a woman whom he completely trusted, and partly because he knew, somehow, that Este would not mind. Chapter 6. Kya was a deaf. At the age of 8, she had still not progressed beyond the groan level. Her control was weak, her pitch was uncertain. It was not lack of native ability. The seeker who found her had not made a mistake. She simply could not pay attention well enough. She did not care. Or so they said. But she cared very much. Cared when the children her age and a year younger than that passed her by. All were kind to her, and few despaired, because it was well known that some sang later than others. She cared even more when she was gently told that there was no point in going on. She was a deaf, not because she could not hear, but because, as her teacher told her, hearing, you hear not. And that was it. A different kind of teacher, different duties, different children. There weren't that many deafs, but there were enough for a class. They learned from the best teachers two could provide, but they learned no music. The Songhouse takes care of all its children, she thought often, sometimes gratefully, sometimes bitterly. I am taken care of. Taught to work by being given duties in the Songhouse, taught science and history and languages, and I'm damned good at it. Outside they would consider me gifted, but here I'm a deaf, and the sooner I leave, the better. She would leave soon. She was 14, only a few months left. At 15 she would be out, with a comfortable stipend at the doors to a dozen universities open to her. The money would continue until she was 22. Later, if she needed, the Songhouse took care of its children. But there were still these few months, and her duties were interesting enough. She worked with security, checking the warning and protective devices that made sure that the Songhouse stayed isolated from the rest of two. Such devices had not always been needed in the old days. There had even been a time when the Songmaster in the high room ruled all the world. But it was still less than a century since the outsiders had tried to storm the Songhouse, in a silly dispute over a pirate who wanted the Songhouse's reputed great wealth. And now the security devices, which took a year to patrol. The duty had taken her around the perimeter, a journey longer than circling the world, and all by scooter, so that she was alone in the forests and deserts and seacoasts of the Songhouse lands. Today she was checking the monitoring devices in the Songhouse itself. In a way, it made her feel superior, to know what none of the children and few of the masters and teachers knew, that the stone was not impenetrable, that, in fact, It was heavily strung with wires and tubes, so that what seemed to be a rambling, primitive stone relic was potentially as modern as anything on two. Possession of the wiring diagrams gave her information that would surprise any of the less informed singers. Yet whenever she dwelt on her pride at having inside knowledge, she forced herself to remember that she was only allowed the knowledge so young because she was completely outside all the discipline and study of the songhouse. She was a deaf. She could know secrets because she would never sing, and so she didn't matter. That was her frame of mind when she entered the high room. She knocked brusquely because she was feeling upset. No answer. Good, the old Songmaster Niv wasn't in. She pushed open the door. The high room was freezing, with all the shutters open to the wintry wind. It was insane to leave the place like this. Who could work here? Instead of going to the panels where the monitors were hidden, she went to the shutters of the nearest window, leaned out to catch them, and found herself looking down forever, it seemed, to the next roof below her. She hadn't realized how high she really was. On the east side, of course, the songhouse was higher, so the stairs up to the high room were not so terribly long. But she was high, and the height fascinated her. What would it be like to fall? Would she feel it like flying, with the exhilaration of the scooter rushing down a hillside? Or would she really be afraid? She stopped herself with one leg over the sill, her arms poised to thrust her out. What am I doing? The shock of realization was almost enough to throw her forward, out of the window. She caught herself, gripped the sides of the window, forced herself to slowly pull her leg back inside, withdraw from the window, and finally kneel, leaning her head against the lip of rock at the base of the window. Why did I do that? What was I doing? I was leaving the songhouse. All trees. Birds paced them, and animals looked up amusedly as they passed. The children schooled to singing, however, the miracle came when they left the Flesket. Este had the driver, who was only 18 and therefore just returned from being a singer outside, stopped them by a small, leaving the cold stone walls of the songhouse. Groans were never taken out. Breezes often were, and Bells knew that the trips in the Flesket were only a taste of things to come. They went through deep forests, skimming over the underbrush as they followed a narrow road cut between tall. Chapter 5. A lesson. Este took her class of bells out of the songhouse. They rode in a Flesket so that all of them could see outside. It was always a wonder to them, that slopped against the rocks and inlets of the shore, the whisper of breezes through leaves and grass. They sat for 15 minutes, which was near the limit of their control, and then Este led them closer to the waterfall. It wasn't a long walk, but it was slick and damp as they approached the small waterfall. Este led the children to the side of the stream. She commanded silence, and because bells have the rudiments of control, they were able to hold utterly still and listen. They heard birdsong, which they longed to answer, the gurgle of the stream,